Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Day9 Daily number 9. So obviously this has to be a good one. We're just going to go ahead and let the audio sync up a little bit, and I'm just going to let everyone know that today is November 3rd. So in case, again, you're watching this on demand, you don't get confused that it's live or something like that. So yeah, this game today is totally sweet. It's free versus HoGiL. You know I'm getting increasingly obsessed with who HoGiL is and everything that he's about. But before we go into that, I need to show you this game that I've been playing. It's this indie game called Igneous. Now this is the actual gameplay. You're just this ball that's trying to run around, and the entire environment is getting destroyed as you're running. It is so incredibly fun, and it's free to download. The game is called Igneous. Just look it up. I highly recommend it. I always like to say a little bit about who I am, what I'm doing, the sort of stuff that I'm up to. Just guys, let you know who Day9 really is. But enough of that crap. Let's watch some StarCraft. So allow me to use my super duper nifty transitions to jump right into free versus HoGiL. Now the map is Byzantium 3. And I'm not going to spend too much time going into this because this game is incredibly long and I have a meeting to go to after this, so we're just going to jump right in. The immediate thing to note about this map is the fact that there is an inverted ramp at the entrance to both bases. That tends to make one base strategies for Protoss a lot weaker. I know most of you tend to just early expand all the time anyways. Oops. Here's the map. I'll just briefly go over this while the game's still running. You don't really want a one base when you have an inverted ramp. It's way too easy for Zerg to break in with early busts. So we do in fact see Free doing the standard early expand in action. And let me turn up a little bit of the volume there, so that way you can hear some of the totally sick, sweet-ass sound effects going on. And let me go ahead and mute the chat to help reduce the stream lag. Now what I love so much about this game is the fact that it's action-packed from start to finish. So we're going to see all sorts of stuff go on, even early on here at our friendly neighborhood HoGiL's expansion. Now one thing briefly to note as the game's going on, look at Zerg's options to expand. God, let me turn this down. These guys are... Whoa! Not turn them up, turn them down. There we go. Look at the Zerg options to expand. Naturally, we're going to be taking this mineral natural here. Maybe we'll take this expansion or this expansion. But other than these ones, once we're set up right here on this row, it gets a little bit tougher to take all that stuff out. We're going to see HoGiL do a beautiful job abusing the architecture of the map. I just absolutely adore the way HoGiL played. Very, very old school, very patient. Actually, it's a good mixture of old school sensibilities and the sort of new school 5-hatch Hydra style openings we're seeing going on here. So already, this is awesome. This is what my brother does. Nick loves making cannons all over the place. And I think the earliest time we saw this used to incredible effect was July versus Rage on Luna. Look at this. So we have HoGiL trying to force some drones back in there. Doesn't really matter because this positioning is so tight. Look at this. Builds a pylon, rat row. This is the sort of stuff that's really, really fun to look for. And if you're ever doing this sort of thing, definitely bring the extra probe. Because if you lose this probe, you feel like an idiot. And you probably are. So bringing the second probe, always, always good. As Zerg, though, don't panic. Lots of Zerg players flip out. We see Zerg players sending drones to try to counterattack the Protoss player. But watch how calmly HoGiL deals with this. So first, he draws all his drones back. He doesn't suicide. He brings them all back to his main, so that way he can have a much stronger economy. We've seen a Zerg recently lose to this. I don't remember who the players were, but the Zerg overreacted and sacked a whole bunch of drones trying to kill it off. Protoss, on the other hand, is spending a lot of money. I mean, think about how much money this is. This is 150, 300, 450, 550, 650. And Protoss is going to have to build a cannon at his front to be safe. That's quite a bit of money. By the way, if you see pauses, like for instance right now, it's because I'm actually pausing the YouTube video. You can't see me slide off screen, but just so no one's freaking out about lag, Day9 lives in a lag-free world. So, watch this. He patiently morphs these sunken colonies. And even watch as these sunken colonies are morphing. There's no suiciding of the Zerglings. The Zerglings are carefully dancing back and forth, making sure nothing weird happens with this probe. Make sure the probe doesn't even scout, because even in the midst of this crisis, Zerg's making sure to shut down Protoss scouting. See, look at him poking in, poking back. And even as these sunken colonies are taking a lot of hits, he's not going to be running forward with these Zerglings. He's saving these Zerglings to take out this back cannon. Sunken colonies have an unbelievable amount of health, which is what makes them so strong. Look, only using the Zerglings to pick off the probe. Still so much patience, and now he's going to arrange himself in a nice position and take it out. Pretty decent amount of damage done by the Protoss, but still, the Zerg did an incredible job of not overreacting. Still a lot of drones going on here. This expansion is well up and running. And this sunken colony is also nice because you're going to end up building that sunken colony a lot of the times anyways, and you've sort of gotten it out of the way. At this point, most low-level Zergs tend to change their game plan. Well, actually, a lot of Zergs at low and high levels tend to change their game plan because they think, well, my economy's been so screwed up by all of this, I may as well try to do some sort of really fast Mutalisk bus and break into my opponent's main. But note that a lot of this ordering that the Protoss had to do, we see 2 cannons that had to go down, and they did have to go down because we do see 10 Zerglings were made, and Protoss got to see that. This gateway has to go down to help wall off. That gas is a little bit later than normal. This Nexus is a little bit later than normal. The economy of Zerg doesn't actually look so far behind Protoss. That's the key thing to note. Anytime you're in this situation, even if you get bunker rushed or something like that, anytime you suffer some sort of very early aggression, always try to tell yourself that the fact that you held it off means that your opponent, Free in this case, has already lost a whole bunch of money in that attack. So, tends to balance out. Seems like a satisfactory position to be in. So, see, here's the sunken colony already being put to good use. These Zerglings don't actually have to be so well positioned. Because, I mean, even if you look at this map, how are you going to stop a probe from wandering out here? If he has 3 paths to exit along, he has any number of ways to enter into your base. Even if you have Zerglings here, that's a pretty wide area to try to be covering. So it's really nice that sunken colony's there that early. Always think of the positive side of things. Don't panic, don't freak out, don't vomit, don't get indigestion. All these sorts of things are stuff we don't want to have happen in our play. The usual sort of transition from Free. Let me rephrase that. Usual sort of transition from Protoss, going straight into Corsairs. Nothing too out of the ordinary is going on right now. I do want to say that I got a great suggestion from Mekham to start prepping the Team Liquid Q&A that's coming up about Zerg vs. Protoss. So some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about right now, all of you should be thinking about to help prepare questions and stuff that you want to ask the nice little panel that we have set up there. So something to keep in mind is that with this modern style of getting Corsairs, there's not a lot of pressure put on Zergs before the Corsair pops out. That gives Zerg a really strong opportunity to power. So for instance, Zerg held off this little push that happened right here with cannons, but when Zerg was able to hold that off, there's not really anything going on. Zerg's happily making Hydralisk dens, hatcheries, drones, he's teching, all sorts of stuff. He's not under any pressure. And in my opinion, the way that Protosses are going to be countering this, are going to counteract the fact that Zergs can get so much economy going, is to put little bits of pressure on early. This is the more traditional, or excuse me, I should say the more typical modern style of play, to get this Corsair out and then do something with a bunch of gateways. Not that there's anything wrong with that, just that you have to be very careful when you do it, that you're not letting Zerg do whatever he wants. And this is really cute. Notice we have 1 hatch here, and if we wind back a little bit, we have 2 hatches here, and 1 hatch there. It looks like HoGiL made this Hydralisk den before he made a 5th hatchery. Correctly so, because he sees that this Corsair is coming out a little bit early. Normally you'd have Scourge out at that point in time, but he obviously doesn't, so he just gets the Hydralisk den, makes a Hydralisk or 2, and then keeps going as normal. We'll see the 5th hatch coming down here in a little bit. Really, really nice to do that sort of thing. not to be too obsessed with following a set pattern, especially when you get thrown off a little bit like this. All you need to do is make these tiny adjustments and then play calmly, which HoGiL does because he's the man. Everyone loves HoGiL. This sort of early Zealot pressure, I like to see this a little bit earlier. Stork's been doing this a lot lately when he early expands, moving out with 3 Zealots and a Dragoon. I think you can pull it off a little sooner if you're free in this position. But still, this is exactly the sort of stuff you want to be doing as Protoss. And look at this placement. Look at this placement as Zerg. This is so great. These are all the sorts of things you should think about with your building placement, especially as I've said, Protosses are going to start getting way, way, way more aggressive. Look at that. He sends the drones back, and they pack right into the one entrance to this sunken colony. You're going to be able to force a lot of guys off by sending drones from here over to your natural expansion. And likewise, if there's still Zealots working their way in there, you can just select the drones and click back on this minerals or click back on those, and it'll pass back and forth between there, really defending that sunken colony. So awesome. HoGiL repels it with ease. Because he's HoGiL, and I love him. He's the man. I want to grow up and be HoGiL one day. Oh, so, usual tech. Nothing going on at the Forge right now. It tends to get delayed, that +1 attack upgrade, given the fact that you're focusing so much of your gas on Archons and Zealots and this sort of thing, but I'm always a huge fan of the +1 attack upgrade. Again, I'm not saying you necessarily should or shouldn't get it. I'm just saying, personally, I like +1 attack upgrade as Protoss. In this situation, you need to ask yourself, how am I going to be securing my third base? That's the biggest question Protoss is generally asking in any game, is how to secure a third. And we're going to see Free do a beautiful job of getting an army and rapidly expanding a whole bunch. And likewise, we're going to see HoGiL respond doubly beautifully by securing expansions in very weird ways, relying on his artful defense to sort of carry the game through. Here's something cute. Zerg is not doing the usual 5-hatch Hydra style. He's going straight for lurkers. Getting lurkers is always a good tool to help you power, to help you build more drones, because your Protoss opponent needs to get observers if he wants to do anything. And up until that time, you can just happily make more drones. So look, here is another hatchery going down for Zerg, focusing on the long term, taking advantage of the fact that he can power and he's getting his economy up. That's why we see that 6th hatch coming out so early. And here's Free, coming out with a Zealot Archon army and then expanding. Notice how he's doing it around the time he's getting the observatory, so that way he can continue pressuring his opponent. This is the sort of timing that we see Bisu do a lot. He sticks to only 4 gateways, occasionally 5, gets Zealots and Archons, and generally Bisu has more Corsairs here as well, but he gets Zealots and Archons and uses that to take a 3rd very early. Bisu's very, 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 very well known for getting that 3rd early. So here's a very classical play for Zerg, to rely on Mutalisks and Lurkers for holding lots of expansions. These Mutalisks are also useful for killing off observers. And these Mutalisks allow you to put a little bit of pressure back on your Protoss opponent. This is actually the style of play I like way more than 5-hatch Hydralisk. Honestly, because I'm not very good at 5-hatch Hydralisk, I'm much more used to playing defensively and using a lot of momentum in late game. I'm not very good at doing that mid-game pressure. I've had to change around a little bit just because I like to be able to play a lot more styles, but this I like because you don't see this very common. Look at the way these Mutalisks can maneuver around. You only need a few extra Zerglings in order to be able to push back with these Mutalisks. And here's the key right now. Normally we see these Mutalisks, when we're going 5-hatch Hydra, we see these Mutalisks used to snipe off Templar, but these are very, very early Mutalisks, and we can use them to kill off Zealots. Killing off Zealots is going to be a big benefit to getting Mutalisks so early. This is awesome. We saw a little bit of this in Luxury versus Gumchi, in the Day9 Daily number 8 that all of you can watch on demand. Obviously, Mutalisks are going to be helpful for sniping off Templar, but we're going to see these Mutalisks are going to be able to do a lot more. They're going to be able to poke in here, pick things off, still wandering around, looking for Zealots about. And the way that HoGiL is able to defend all of this is because he focused a lot on gas, lurkers, and expanding, and less on getting a whole bunch of hatcheries to pump out Hydralisks. So right now we can clearly say that HoGiL's general setup is focused not on huge mid-game control. We have a little bit of some Hydras with speed and range going on right here, but not a tremendous amount. These Hydralisks are used to support the Lurkers, more so than used as some sort of big mid-game aggression push. I just love this sort of defensive play, and big key is getting the Lurkers quickly, and then getting the Mutalisks quickly thereafter. Really nice style. Now watch how not aggressive HoGiL's going to be. He's poking in here, he's getting a nice position, maybe hoping to take some stuff out, but these Mutalisks, he wants to do some little bit of extra magic with these. Look, taking a few extra hits on the Zealots, that's so great. Love that quite a bit. And of course, taking out Templars always beneficial, but the Mutalisks, when they come out this early, are a lot more difficult to deal with. Look at what Free's doing. He's taking this expansion right here. I would not call this a hidden expansion. A lot of players, when they're in a tough position, will expand down here, or maybe do something weird like expand up there, and hope Zerg doesn't notice. But this is fairly well defended, because again, if we check out the map, this narrow area, you just have a few cannons and some Templar, and then you can run a big army right down here and be in Happy Town, USA. Or Happy Town, South Korea, since we're watching StarCraft. So, now we're starting to transition into a bigger army. The whole point of getting these Lurkers and Mutalisks was to be able to defend these three really spread out areas. But, we do see HoGiL able to secure his natural, this mineral natural, and another gas up here. And now is when the big army starts to flow in. See, look how well defended this expansion was. The instant we saw unit movement here, Free just easily moved down there to defend it. This is very terrifying to deal with a Zerg. Oh god, I just hate this when a Protoss is expanding a lot. You just stick with maybe 7-6 gateways, especially after you've taken this expansion, and you just keep expanding. It's a pain in the ass. And then you can even get Reavers a little bit earlier as Protoss if you end up with this. You don't necessarily have to add on 15 gateways. When you have this many resources, you can easily get a bunch of Reavers and end up with a Doom army that can really aggressively push into your opponent. This is really stressful for Zerg to deal with. Now let me pause for a moment and say that the fundamental goal of Protoss is to put tons and tons and tons of pressure on Zerg all game long. Now I don't necessarily mean Protoss is attacking and moving tons of forces in or doing harassment storm drops, but if we watch this game right now, we see that Free is expanding very quickly to his mineral natural and then expanding very quickly again to a gas. That's very stressful for Zerg to deal with, and that's a very good way to put pressure on the Zerg because he has to expand or he has to do some big attack to pound you apart. HoGiL, in this case, opts to do what I consider the less common path. Most Zergs, especially nowadays, love the fact that they can use Mutalisks to snipe and they have a bunch of Hydralisks, but HoGiL is going to opt to do a lot of expanding to counter the Protoss. He's not panicking. He's almost saying, yeah, go ahead and expand if you want to. I'm going to expand more and do a much better job of defending. So we see this army only now moving out for Free. And the setup from HoGiL is not going to be used to take it out. HoGiL's not going for the big army. Look at this expansion right here. HoGiL's almost sacrificing control of the center in order to have this roundabout control of the sides. And in that way, we're going to see HoGiL take a huge advantage of how much he can spread out and how well positioned his defense is. And he's getting a lot of evolution chambers, just upgrading, holding these key positions. I mean, look at this. HoGiL just walked his whole army up along here and then set up right there. Beautiful. No freaking out at all by HoGiL. And of course, at the same time, I love Free's play. Free is really good at timing expansions in this matchup, especially if you watch some of Free's games on Andromeda. Free was very good at expanding and then taking the side gas expansion and then taking the center. Free was incredibly good at having just such a big army that the center expansion on Andromeda ended up being the most well-defended area. And see HoGiL, he's trying to work around to these sides, but he's patiently moving back. And of course, with all this action going on, it's very easy to focus on what's going on the main screen. But of course, as I say a bazillion times, the minimap is where the interesting stuff happens. What we see here are lurkers. Watch right there. There are some lurkers going on right here. We see some troops trying to move down here. Now just focus on the minimap with me. Free moves his blob down. More units moving for HoGiL. Now I don't know whether this was intentional by HoGiL to pull these units here, or whether he noticed these units were moving here. What's important to see is notice all these units moving back here and pulling up, and look at all these lurkers moving down to defend this expansion. That's how these lurkers are safe. Free's entire army is pulled over here. No Protoss in his right mind is going to be moving half his units here and the other half there. No, you always want to keep a big ball as Protoss, and HoGiL's taking advantage of this. He's getting the opportunity to set up some lurkers there. The big focus of HoGiL's army is to have some Hydralisks, but to mainly have lurkers and Zerglings. This is a very, very strong style army. And the big reason why HoGiL is playing so defensively right now has a lot to do with the fact that he's behind on the +1 carapace upgrade. That's actually a really big deal in Protoss vs. Zerg, the +1 attack versus +1 carapace, because if the Protoss gets ahead in that, then Protoss can kill Zerglings in 2 hits. But if Zerg has matched Protoss, then Zerglings die in 3 hits. So naturally, in this case, if HoGiL is behind on that upgrade, he doesn't want to be doing anything too aggressive because all his Zerglings are going to burn up really quickly. So he's going to play very defensively, move around, and rely on his gas units until the late game happens, and then he can use the mineral units, which are Zerglings, to do a whole ton of damage. Look at this very nice defense. See, look at this great movement. Now HoGiL's starting to move around here more to defend this expansion. And what HoGiL is going to end up relying on is a lot of counterattacks. A lot of saying, yeah, I have my lurkers and a handful of units positioned so well that you obviously can't break it. Again, thanks to high grounds here and high grounds here and this narrow little entrance here. And look, he's moving a big army here and just a handful of Zerglings there. He's controlling this outside ring as opposed to controlling the center, which traditional Hydra Mutaplay tries to take advantage of. So this is going to get crushed pretty badly. This just did not go anywhere near as planned. Kind of showing why it's so important to be ahead in upgrades, which actually I think HoGiL may... Yeah, actually HoGiL is ahead in upgrades. That shows, again, how HoGil's focus is not on having a big army, because you saw how clearly it got smashed. I mean, if your whole goal was to have a really strong, big mid-game army and it gets crushed that badly, some real weird's going on. But if that's not your focus, as in HoGiL's case, that was more of a distraction, so that these sorts of counterattacks can happen. And look at that positioning. Look at that. That's beautiful. Look at all those lurkers there. That is just incredibly well-positioned lurkers, taking advantage of that thin ramp. We even have a Nidus Canal there. Such beautiful defensive techniques by HoGiL. And again, look at all this counterattacking going on. These Zerglings are just going to cause terror for Protoss. Look, he's trying to move down, eaten up at that ramp. Incredible defense. But Free, again, being the brilliant expansion timer, expanding right there. His army moves up here to be aggressive. He's expanding right there because it's well defended. When his army was over here, he was not expanding over there. You want to line up when you're aggressive with when you're expanding, and with where you're being aggressive, with where you're expanding. In late game, you can use Zerglings to pick off Templar like that. That's always really good to do, and especially because your focus isn't so much on minerals at this stage yet. It's okay to sack a handful of Zerglings to take out a Templar, obviously. So what's really interesting is when you're doing this style as HoGiL, these counterattacks look very Zerg vs. Terran-esque. We have a whole bunch of Zerglings and a Defiler sneaking around to swarm an expansion to take it out. Very, very good technique to abuse when the Protoss is spreading out more and more. And what's even interesting to note is that Protoss really isn't really all that spread out. I mean, even if we look at the minimap, Protoss has these expansions taken. Really, he has a pretty tight area. He pretty much doesn't have to worry about any drops, because drops would have to work their way through either here or across here, neither of which is very appealing, considering most units are going to be rallied there, and this is just such a thin wall to walk between. So this feels good for Protoss, but still we can see how much HoGiL can take advantage of it, and how much really any Zerg would be able to take advantage of it. And look at this. HoGiL expanding down here. If Free tries to be more aggressive here, we see units moving across here. That's the brilliance of expanding to opposite corners of the map. We even saw Jaedong take advantage of that in the MSL finals against Kal on Loki 2. We saw Jaedong expand to opposite corners of the map, and it was very difficult for Kal to really choose one to be aggressive against. Whole lot of this stuff going on, these swarms and cute little counterattacks. And we're also going to see Guardians come into play, especially if you're doing this late game oriented style. When your Mutalisks run out of use in the mid game because Protoss builds up so many Dragoons, great way to continue making use of them is just to get the Greater Spire. We're going to see Guardians popping up right there. And see, look at this. We have more Zerglings getting ready to be all sneaky over here, and we have more Zerglings ready to maybe do some action down here. Oh, I guess to defend this expansion. And look at this. Troops moving here to kill this off. Counterattack here takes out the expansion. This is a very difficult style of Zerg to play against as Protoss, especially if the Zerg is very good at defending. And as we've seen several times, a bunch of Zerglings have died. They've just getting eaten up by this army. I mean, even without the upgrade advantage, we're still seeing real difficulty with these Zerglings doing anything really permanent. A lot of them are dying, but the fact is, it's all worth it if you can just take the focus on these expansions and let Zerg continue to take these corners. Here's Mutalisk getting ready to Guardian up. Now this is probably my favorite part of this entire game, is this defense on this expansion right here. This is going to be so awesome. I really think that Free should have incorporated a few Reavers into his play right now, just because that's so effective at busting in to some of these locations, but still, having just gateway units and being so aggressive with expanding and attacking is also totally reasonable. Now watch this. HoGiL always has a Nidus Canal ready. Look at this. You'll even note from the positioning of that Nidus Canal, you'll even note from the positioning of the Nidus Canal there, that look at that. That Nidus Canal was built the second that hatchery finished. That is how these expansions are going to stay alive. And look at this incredible defense. Look how strong Lurkers with Swarm are. Only the Zealots are going to be able to do damage, and watch them all evaporate. Free has incredible macro, though, so it's continuing to look scary. More Swarms being thrown down, and we're also going to see that those Mutalisks, I'm really glad the Observer went over to check them out, because those are going to Guardian up in a second. And this is the key whenever you're doing this sort of heavily defensive style of Zerg, where you're trying to expand around a bunch and just try to hold with Lurkers, is that you need to have little bits of counter-aggression, either Guardians going on here, maybe some Zerglings with Swarm trying to take out that expansion, all while this is happening. And look at HoGiL just flooding out with more Lurkers, plaguing. This is so sweet. I love this. God, HoGiL, you're so sweet. You're almost as awesome as that Igneous game that we saw at the beginning of the cast. All of you need to download that and play that. On the impossible difficulty, that game is impossible. I literally cannot beat like the second level unless I try 50 billion times. Look at this continual defense. More and more Lurkers. We have not seen a transition to Ultralisks yet. Still just Zerglings, Lurkers, and Swarm, because defending is so strong when you have that many Lurkers. What is this going to do against Lurkers? None of them can do damage under Swarm, except the Archons, which can do a little bit of splash. But if you have like 8 or 9 Lurkers, nothing's going to happen. Free has to pull out. Spread the Guardians out a little bit. I mean, that's sort of obvious, but really, the fact that HoGiL is focused enough to do this is amazing. And look, right as this attack finishes here, another expansion going down there. Totally beautiful. Absolutely wonderful play by HoGiL. We also want to note, though, that this game is far from over. It still has about 10 minutes left of game time. That's because Protoss has taken so many resources here and is so good at holding it that he can still maintain a huge presence for a long time. Now, in terms of late game transitions as Zerg, you don't want to just stick with gateway units, because if you do that, then Lurkers with Swarm, or even just Lurkers in general, can give you a really big amount of trouble. Ultralisks also become very problematic as time progresses. So the best ways to take advantage of a Zerg who's spreading out that much is, one, to just get Reavers to really strengthen the shit out of your army, and then it's almost impossible for Zerg to hold it off. 2, get a whole bunch of Corsairs, because then you can start taking out overlords that are naturally going to be spread all around the map, and Zerg starts getting very, very cramped for minerals. Moreover, in the late game, Zergs tend to phase out things like Hydralisks, and really just anti-air in general. The focus is more on Lurkers, Lings, Defilers, and Ultralisks, and if you have Corsairs patrolling all around, all over the place, you can kill a whole bunch of stuff. You don't even really need to get Dark Templar when you do that. Just the Corsairs themselves do a ton of damage. And then naturally, if you want to get some Dark Templar to build off that, totally awesome technique to do. And the third one is to start getting shuttles with speed and do a lot of aggressive harass. But that tends to come with getting Reavers as well. But doing one of those 3 things you should always think of doing. Getting Corsairs is probably the easiest and most common one to do. Reaver's a little less common, but very, 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 very strong. Especially if you have a big, muscular army that from all these gateways, which is what we see Free have right here. So, some things to note. Only now we are ending up seeing Reavers and Corsairs from Free. I would have liked to see them come out just a little bit earlier. Perhaps when this 4th was secured, or at the very least around the time that 5th was being secured. Oh, Reavers are just the biggest pain to deal with. Not just when you have Ultralisks, but if you have any composition of units, it's really obnoxious to deal with. This was awesome by Free. Just a little creative use of speed shuttles. This is the sort of stuff that I think needed to happen a little bit earlier, because you always need to think preventatively. You need to think, how can I stop Zerg from expanding all over the place? What this feels more like is responsive. Free's sort of going, uh-oh, Zerg has all these bases, how do I do anything? I guess I can get some shuttles and Corsairs. You want to be getting those as Zerg is starting to take the whole map, because then in that fashion, Zerg never really gets a good defense set up, and you're exploiting the fact that he's thinly defended and spread out all over the place. Something to think about. More nice little harassment going on here. This kind of backfires. I mean, maybe takes out a few drones there. That was a little bit of better storm. But unfortunately, some Scourge come out and end up taking everything out. And see, look at that. Just one drop with a little bit of awkward defense there completely took out the expansion. And now this giant death ball that Free has is even more difficult to deal with, because you don't have the minerals coming in from here. Especially when these are so well defended, taking shots at the main and these areas that might have a little bit weaker defense, just because they don't have these tight entrances like the mains do, that also might be a good spot to attack. You don't necessarily need to target an expansion, you just need to break in somewhere, because when Zerg is spreading out this thin, he's just praying that he can hold all these places he's taking, because that's the linchpin of his of the strategy. So if you can break in anywhere, it's going to be a real difficulty for Zerg to deal with. Look at this. Attack up here, who cares? Let's counterattack. There's really been no direct assault on this all game long. All of it has been counterattacking and abusing the position of Free's death ball. This bust-in is pretty intimidating to deal with, but at this point, Zerg has this expansion so well defended that this loss isn't nearly as difficult to deal with. If, for instance, this attack had happened way earlier, and these Reavers had been used to bust in there much earlier, this would have died, maybe Free would have lost this, but these expansions here wouldn't have been nearly as operational as they are now. HoGiL doing the right thing, trying to continue to defend here with some units, but also look how he's focusing on expanding here and counterattacking there. Really cool style to play. Really tough. It's actually a pain in the ass to do. But once you get the hang of it, it feels so fun, because instead of zipping all over the place being aggressive, you're zipping all over the place being defensive, and you're doing little tiny counterattacks here and there that are very obnoxious to deal with. And that's just incredibly rewarding when you finally hold everything off, and there's this huge swing of momentum forward when you finally get your economy going and you have all these units. I do agree with Free's decision to expand here, because again, there's this huge army here, and this is going to be the most easily defendable one. Maybe happened a little early, probably could have sent just a few units up there, and then pulled the majority of this army back. That's a good technique to do when the defense pretty much looks crumbled. You don't walk everything down to kill it off. You send just 4 or 5 zealots there and then bring the rest of everything back. Because right now the loss of this expansion is just icky. I mean, you just don't want to lose an expansion that you're trying to take, especially when this is your only running expansion as Protoss. And I had another thing to say about that, and I can't remember what it was, but it was definitely smart. You could have easily defended this if you just pulled back these extra forces, and then that would have set up taking this natural and this main as well. So honestly, I would say that Free just barely lost that expansion. He could have easily protected this. Well, maybe not so easily, but he could have protected this even though he would have taken some losses, and it would have been in good position. And here we have some Corsairs. Free looked like he made some Corsairs and then never really did anything with them. That strikes me as a little bit odd. I mean, these Corsairs are clearly positioned to say, hey, you're never going to Guardian me here again, but if you just went the little extra bit and made maybe 8 or 9 Corsairs, and then started going around the map, all these Overlords would be taken out. Zerg would feel obligated to build spore colonies in weird places he doesn't necessarily need to. You can even, and this is really awesome, run like 9 or 10 Corsairs into the main and drop 2 shuttles of Dark Templars and just demolish the main ultra quickly. There's an incredibly good example of that, of XDS Gur versus CHRH on Lost Temple. XDS Gur just started using a ton of shuttles with Dark Templar and killed almost everything CHRH had in a really short period of time. So for any of you who are looking for reference games from 1999, check that one out. Zerg continuing to expand, and at this point we're seeing a lot more of a centralized divide. Zerg's focusing a lot of his efforts expanding here because now Zerg finally has an army that can contend for center map control. So he doesn't really need to do these weird sorts of wacky defense and expanding out here. It's really interesting to note how intimidating Free's force has been all game long, but HoGiL has held his own just by having really well-positioned lurkers and by spreading his expansions out so well. I think that if you're doing this really aggressive death army style, you need to be doing a little bit extra when Zerg's expanding that much and playing that well defensively, whether that be getting the Corsairs and Dark Templar and Reavers to harass, or getting Reavers a lot earlier to push. Dark Archon, this is clearly going to be used for feedback. Killing off these defilers is crucial. Maelstrom is less key at this stage. The Reavers and Zealots and Archons are going to make short work of anything that gets close anyways. Freezing them isn't really going to be that crucial until your army gets much bigger. Right now, all the money really does need to be spent on Reavers. And look at this. This is one of the first confrontations we've seen of HoGiL just straight up attacking Free's army. Because again, that's not the point of HoGil's build. It was all revolving around counterattacking. And what I really, really love about this game is there is that old school unit composition, getting lurkers and mutalisks and expanding quite a bit early on and using that instead of getting hydralisks and then mutalisks. And as a result, it still ended up doing an incredibly good job against this very standard, very modern, traditional play. Not traditional, typical, there we go. The more trendy, the more common stuff we see nowadays. The old school style opening worked beautifully. And also a nice benefit as Zerg, if you're practicing this style, your games naturally are much longer. I think last time in the Day9 dailies, I did say that my average game length is around 14 or 15 minutes, whereas most people tend to be around 11 or 10. And that's because I love playing this style in Zerg vs. Protoss a lot. Super late game oriented, so most of my games in Zerg vs. Protoss are about 18 minutes long. And now, I mean, we're pretty much just seeing Free scrape around for any little advantage he can. I mean, we're just going to slide forward a little bit and just admire the fact that HoGiL has so many units, and Free is just bummed out about it. Just, feel so bad for him. Look at his hands, they were shaking. God. And look at the length of his fingernails, man. Trim those. My goodness. Let's take a brief look at the mini-map again, because this is my oh-so-favorite part, if we just zoom on in. So we see here's the early attack going on. HoGiL does not panic. Right after he holds off the attack, he ends up getting that expansion. And everything Free does is very normal from here on out. But watch the way that Zerg is now expanding here, and he's trying to be a little bit aggressive with... These are Mutalisks moving around the map right now, holding off this defense with Lurkers. It's going to be really hard to break that, no matter what your unit composition is. I'm just going to scoot the window up just a touch. Here he is being aggressive with Mutalisks, continuing to expand. And then all this troop movement in the middle is so cool. We have some units piling up there, putting a little bit of pressure on. We see the units pull around here, and an expansion is going to go down here real soon. Look at this. HoGiL ends up pulling back all his units. Look at this. Draws all the units all the way back up to the top here just to defend, and now he's expanding over there. As Free's army moves over here, we see Lurkers going up here to this top expansion. As we see Free's army a little bit to the side here, we see HoGiL doing a big attack here, and we see a counterattack coming along this side, abusing the fact that Protoss is getting a little bit too spread out. We see a really great defense here, and while this defense is going on, we see more movement away, just counterattacking. Here are the units that were trying to counterattack that ended up dying, and look, more units positioned to attack this expansion here. And the effect is that it does end up killing it off. More movement away from Free's army. Look at how rarely these units are going anywhere near here. They're just constantly going up, away. We have more units going up, away. We see that this natural, or this main is finished. We see a Nidus Canal popping out. Look at this. This is just sick defense and play by HoGiL. And look, the instant this army goes up here, it's finally strong enough to kill it off thanks to the Reavers we see at the front lines here. More attacking elsewhere. This expansion's down. Coming up here, taking out this expansion of Free. And now, finally, we see that HoGiL has one half of the map, and he just plays it out very normally from there. So that was some really sweet play. I really like that because it's just so really not modern. And I like it when people are starting to do trends that are not the typical stuff that we're seeing. I'm now happy to take some questions. I can take them for about 5 or 10 minutes. Please post the questions in yellow. This game was Free versus HoGiL, the best game in the universe. Just love that play. That was so kick-ass to see the art of defense. No emphasis on mid-game control for Zerg at any point. So someone, Lumi asks, in the early game, Free could have taken out the hatchery if he would have focused his cannons on that instead of trying to stop the inevitable success of the sunken colonies. Let's actually take another look at that. So we see here on the main screen, we see that this push is coming in with all these cannons. I don't really know if he could have taken it out because these sunken colonies popped out pretty early. I mean, if we look at the timing going on right here, if my YouTube will play, right as this cannon finishes, so this cannon's clearly shooting this the whole time. So if these cannons had focus fired on this, the net result would have been that these sunken colonies would have taken these out much, much earlier, and I'm not sure if this would have been taken out. I think that's what's far more important. Whether it would have been taken out or not, you shouldn't go for that sort of stuff, because if it fails, you are screwed. You are doomed as Protoss, because you've put all your energy into trying to kill a hatchery, and it just didn't work out, and then the Zerg ends up with a much bigger advantage. Even though it ended up not taking out the hatchery, it was very balanced with maybe a little bit of an advantage to Free there, and I think that that's all you really want to aim for in that scenario. Like that question. That's an interesting thing to note. That's useful to think about, but again, just be careful when you do that, because you don't want to have some violent backfire. Here's a great question. Holy Hobgoblin asks, you talked about late game additions for Protoss, but what about arbiters or carriers? The big issue I have with carriers is that it's difficult to transition to. You have to build all the stargates, you have to start upgrading, and then it takes a long-ass time for those carriers to actually build. They're very expensive, so they only end up being very effective once you have a lot of them. The easier case to get carriers is when you're going Corsair Reaver. For instance, on Andromeda, you open up with Corsair Reaver, you take your island, you take an island expansion that's nearby you, and as you're spreading out, it's very easy to just move right into carriers, because a lot of times you have the fleet beacon to help with disruption web for your Corsairs, and the Corsairs can help defend those carriers from Scourge. In this case, if you have a really big ground army, it's kind of weird to have your carriers pushing with a big ground army. Going straight for Reaver is not only a lot easier economically, because you already have the robotics facility, but it'll end up being a lot stronger against Ultralisks and the like. If you're going carrier, the Zerg player can just throw a plague, and if it hits all of them, it's really kind of and dangerous. In terms of arbiters, I just don't have much of an opinion on that. Likewise, it's does take a long time to do, and you need to be maintaining such high pressure on Zerg. I really think that the only benefit you would get from arbiters would be if you were using recall in places, and I think that Corsair Dark Templar not only accomplishes the same thing as that, or Shuttles accomplishes the same thing as a recall, but both of those options are easier to do and can do pressure before that attack. So for instance, if you do a recall with an Arbiter, the Arbiter isn't really doing anything up to that point. If you're planning on doing a Corsair Dark Templar drop, Corsairs can be doing all sorts of stuff before that point. So that's why I think it might be a little bit better not to go for Arbiters, but I'm interested to see if there are possibilities to do that. So if you're in the mood to experiment, go for it. More questions. So, Tenda asks, can the modern 5-hatch Hydra into Mutalisk build transition I read that wrong. Can the modern 5-hatch Hydra into Mutal build transition well into this defensive style of play after the initial Hydra pressure? The answer has to be yes. I mean, you can transition into it. Man, that's a tough question. How do we answer that? I'm just going to think for a little bit and wait for my thoughts to coagulate into something coherent. So we're going Hydralisk. We have this big mid-game army, and we've pushed the Protoss back. And I think once we've pushed the Protoss back, the transition that we end up doing would be something along the lines of expanding really aggressively during that period, maybe taking 2, maybe even 3 expansions, and getting a whole lot of lurkers. We push the Protoss back with that mid-game push, and then, now that Protoss is in a weakened position to put any pressure on us, we expand. And in that period of time of expanding, we emphasize getting a lot of lurkers and a lot of Zerglings. We spend no more minerals on Hydralisks. We just morph our current Hydralisk army into lurkers and start expanding around. I personally like doing the Hydra, the Lurker Muta combo early on because it's a little easier to put pressure on, and it's always really annoying when they do a big push and you can't snipe with the Mutalisks. And if you were planning on doing the Hydra Muta combo and your snipes screw up at all, you can't do any sort of effective transition. I just prefer doing the style we saw here. I don't have any experience doing 5-hatch Hydra into this sort of very aggressive, expanding, heavily defensive-oriented play. So hope those thoughts were complete enough to give you an idea of stuff to try if you were going for it, that sort of style based on 5-hatch Hydra. So CB asks, Free versus Jaedong in the MSL a few seasons ago. Free was able to demolish Jaedong with use of Reavers and Archons. Why did he fall against HoGiL when he beat Jaedong? I think the answer to that has a lot to do with the timing of getting those Reavers. Free probably saw all these expansions going down and just thought that he could bash right in there with a big ground army. And 90% of the time you can until you're against that S-class level defense. And really you start needing to get Reavers a lot earlier. So I just think the reason has a lot to do with the getting Reavers so late. So really get Reavers a lot sooner if you want to be doing that sort of aggressive pushing action. I'm going to briefly swap screens just because things are getting a little bit out of sync. Hopefully that synced it up a little bit better. If it's still out of sync, just let me know. Is a queen worth it for the Parasite to track Protoss' army with the rapid expansion style? I don't think so. Really, you should just be getting Overlord with speed or having Zerglings patrolling around the end. Parasite is an interesting thing because I always struggle to find situations where you really want to be getting Parasite instead of Overlord speed. The natural way that you would be getting Parasite instead of Overlord speed is if you had a lot of queens lying around anyways. So in that situation, I just don't see that coming up a lot. Oh, Spec asks a great question. I love this question. Spec asks, is HoGiL style only good for some maps over others? Yes. Let's take a look at the map. Here we see Byzantium. Because of this narrow entrance right here, and because of the fact, look at the distance from this main to this main. Huge spread going on around here. It's going to be really tough for Protoss' big army to be moving back and forth there. In a map where the mains are a little bit closer, you run the risk of not being able to expand so wildly all over the place. Also, maps where the expansions have very tight chokes on them make it very easy for lurkers to dominate. Having a lot of high ground ramps also is the key for that defense. I mean, let's just go back and look here a little bit. If you have a defense sitting up here with a bunch of lurkers, it's really impossible to work your Protoss army up there. So these expansions are really safe for HoGiL. Naturally, I would never say that you can't do it on any map. I really just think the important thing is to consider these sorts of things and make sure that you have some way of defending without just lurkers. And I'm just going to take one more question because I'll have to end up heading out after this. I will just look for just a little bit. I'm going to take this question because I really like it when players ask things from a less experienced point of view. The question from Clown Baby is, as an inexperienced Zerg, would you recommend learning HoGiL style of play first, or the more typical aggressive style of other players? You know, I would recommend HoGiL style because it's so fun. Any build really is going to have its own sets of difficulties to it. For instance, if you're doing the 5-hatch Hydralisk and Mutalisk play, you need to be sure you're doing really good aggressive moves with that army. And if you're a little bit too passive with it, it'll screw you up. Likewise, there's a whole lot of pitfalls with HoGiL style. But the reason I like HoGiL style and why I recommend it to an inexperienced player is because it teaches you the following three skills that players seem to forget a lot. The first one is it goes for a long-term game, so you get lots of practice with late-game macro and late-game decision making. The second one is that you end up focusing more on expanding to counter Protoss's expanding, as opposed to attacking and being aggressive to counter Protoss's expanding. And the third one is it forces you to be all over the place. It forces you to be in many places at once, which will naturally help improve your APM. If the style of play demands that you be doing a lot of things at once, you're naturally going to think, oh god, I got to start doing this stuff quicker and quicker, as opposed to in other styles where you think, man, I really need to spam faster to look cool. So yeah, that I think is a fantastic question. Thank you very much. And that concludes the Day9 Daily number 9. Thank you so much for tuning in. And yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for today. Take care, everyone. Cheers.